Good morning. We're in Masechta Middos. We learned Perek Gimel. I apologize for the noise. There's a truck unloading something in my Chanaya. We learned yesterday Middos, Perek Gimel, Mishnah Aleph, and we're in the topic of building a Mizbeach. We're going to quickly review what we learned yesterday, because what we're going to learn today, the continuation of Mishnah Aleph, is based on what we learned yesterday. So page 42 of your Masechta Middos says, HaMizbeach hayashloshim ushtayim al shloshim ushtayim ola amma b'konas amma zeh hayesod. Before we actually go into that, the meaning of that Mishnah, let's go back to our diagram number 3. This is what we're talking about. We always need to know where we are. We entered Har HaBayis on the east, Shushan Habira. We came to the Soreg. We walked through the Chayil. We walked into the Ezras Nashim. We went up 15 steps. We entered Shar Nikanor. We entered the small area 11 by 135 of Ezras Yisrael. If you were permitted, you entered Ezras Kohanim, which is again 11 by 135, and now you're at the Mizbeach. The Mizbeach has its ramp, the kevesh, going up. The kevesh begins on the southern side of the Azara. This is the Azara. We're in this structure. We've left the Ezras Noshim. We are in the Azara. And we're at the Mizbeach. The ramp begins near the southern wall of the Azara, and the Mizbeach is more towards the center or the northern wall of the Azara. And here's the Beis HaMitbachayim, for lack of a better word, the butcher shop, where they did the shechita and they began the process of bringing a carbon, which eventually went on to the Mizbeach. Here's the Mizbeach. If you want to understand this in terms of Har HaBayis today, we looked at this maybe 2 weeks ago, diagram 11. Okay. Remember diagram 3, the Azara. And in the Azara, you have another structure. This whole area is Azara. There's empty spaces. And in part of the empty space, there's the Mizbeach and the Beis HaMitbachayim. And in the Azara, there's another structure built. Ulam, the rectangular building. And when you walked through the Ulam, you came into the Heichal. First part of the Heichal had the Shulchan, the Menorah, and the Mizbeach HaKtores, partition, and the Aron. We are here. If we were going to superimpose this on today's Har HaBayis, we go to diagram 11, and that's what it would look like. Aerial view of today's Har HaBayis. Okay. The gold is the Ezras Nashim. The little white are the steps to go up the Shar Nikanor. The blue is the Azara, and you can see in the Azara, they're showing you a Mizbeach. So that would be where the Mizbeach would be on the Har HaBayis from an aerial view. If you want to know directions, we always say our perspective is east to west, as if you're looking from Har HaZeisim east towards west. So this is the eastern wall of the Har HaBayis at the bottom of the picture. You would walk into the Har HaBayis through Shar Shushan Habira. You would walk into the Ezras Nashim. You're moving from east to west. 15 steps. You're in the Azara, the blue. And there is the Mizbeach. At the top of your picture, you have the western wall of the Har HaBayis. And that would be the Mizbeach superimposed from an aerial view where it would be on the Har HaBayis. Obviously, the areas where you can and cannot go on the Har HaBayis are subject to halachic dispute. That is the picture. So we're talking about this area now where the Mizbeach is. So we learned yesterday that the Mizbeach was built in parts. Page 42, HaMizbeach, HaYashloshim Ushtaim Al-Shloshim Ushtaim. The bottom frame of the Mizbeach was made by taking 432, actually they're a little bigger, by taking planks or boards and making a mizgeret, a frame, so that inside the frame there was an area open of 32 by 32. These planks rose to the level of 1 amma. So you have an area now enclosed, 32 by 32, rising to the height of 1. They then took special rocks, which we'll learn about not today, special rocks, and they put these rocks into this frame, poured hot lead and poured tar, and it hardened the rocks in place. They removed the border, and they had now a base. It's called Yesod, the foundation of the Mizbeach of 32 by 32. But as I mentioned yesterday, there's a little trick to this, which hopefully we'll get to today. It wasn't 32 by 32 on all sides. But for right now, diagram 19. We looked at it yesterday, 1A, 1B. They created a border, put rock in it, they made the yitzikah, they removed the boards, and you have a 32 by 32. As I said, you can see it's not really 32 by 32. If you look at 1A, you can see that there's not a border around the whole bottom foundation, and that's what we'll probably get to today. But for right now, the first lowest level of the Mizbeach foundation, 32 by 32 going up 1. Next, the Mishnah continues. Nimtza shloshim ushloshim. They then went to the second stage of the Mizbeach. They took now 4 planks, and they made a mizgeret, a frame, 30 by 30 on top of the 32 by 32. This second frame was 30 by 30, and it went up 5 amos. They put the rock in there, the tar, the hot lead, the rocks hardened. They removed the mizgeret, and now you had a place of 30 by 30 to the height of 5. So our Mizbeach right now is 6 amos high. The bottom level of 32 by 32 rises to 1. The second level, which is called Sovev, it encircles the Mizbeach, goes up 5, but is 30 by 30, and that's 2A and 2B. And then they did the same thing. They created a frame of 28 by 28 on top of the 30 by 30. And this frame rose to the level of 3. They put the rock, the tar, the lead, that hardened, and you now had a level of 3 high and 28 by 28. So how high is our Mizbeach now? First level goes up 1, second level goes up 5, that's 6, third level goes up 3, that's 9. The Mizbeach is 10 high. You go to diagram 19, sub 4, and in each corner of the Mizbeach there was a keren, a corner that rose up 1. And so the Mizbeach from the ground to the top of the keren, to the point of the keren, was 10. 1 plus 5 plus 3 plus 1. And this was demonstrated yesterday in diagram number 20. 32 by 32 was to the height of 1, indented because the next frame was 30 by 30 and went up 5. Indented, and the next frame was to the height of 3, 28 by 28. So you have 1, 5, 3 is 9, and then the keren, the corner, was another 1. 1, 5, 3, 1, and that's the Mizbeach. The top of the Mizbeach should be 28 by 28, but it's not. because although the top box is 28 by 28, each corner took up, we go back to diagram 19, number 4. Each corner in the 4 corners took up an amma. So when you're measuring between the two corners, you lose 2 amos. So now, although this foundation, the top foundation was 28 by 28, you now lost 2 amos in each direction. So you had 26 by 26. They then left 1 amma in each direction, north, west, south, and east, for the Kohanim to be able to walk on top of the Mizbech without getting burnt by the fire. So that's a lot. You lose another 2 amos. So now the top of the Mizbeach, where there was avoda done, fire, etc., was only 24 by 24. So we started off at a foundation of 32 by 32. We built a box on it 30 by 30. We built a box on it 28 by 28. On top of that box, we put 4 corners. Each of them is an amma. So we lost 2 more ammas. It became 26 by 26. We left an amma in each direction for the Kohanim to walk. So the actual middle of the Mizbeach, where there were fires, was 24 by 24. And that's what our Mishnah tells us now. We read it yesterday, page 43. Nimtza shloshim al shloshim. The second box is 30 by 30. Ola Chomesh, went up 5, Akonis Amma, and then it went in. Zeh HaSovev, that's the middle box called Sovev. Nimtza Esu Mushmona al Esu Mushmona. They made the third box 28 by 28. Makom HaKronos, and then at the top of this box, which is 28 by 28, you have these corner pieces. Each of them is an amma by an amma high. Again, you lose 2 amos at the top. Nimtza eser v'sheish al eser v'sheish. So 28 by 28 became 26 by 26. Mokum hilach raglei kohanim, the place where the kohanim could walk. Amma mizev, amma mizev. In every direction, he left 1 amma open. So 26 by 26 now just became 24 by 24. Nimtza eser v'arba al eser v'arba. We now have 24 by 24, Makom HaMarocha, which was the place of the fires on the Mizbeach. If we go back to diagram number 3, you see at the top of the Mizbeach, it's showing you 3 fires, 3 areas of fire, and a big circle in the middle. According to the way we paskin, to Machlokas and Masechta Yuma, there were 3 fires on top of the Mizbeach. There was the Marocha Gedola. That's where they burned the Korban Tamid. That's where burning of Korbanos occurred, the large fire. And then there was, you can see it says the picture Marocha Gedola. And then there was Mareches Ketores. That was a place where there was a fire burning and they were able to take fire and coals and take it from this Mizbeach, which is the Mizbeach HaChitzon. This Mizbeach that we're learning about has 3 names. Mizbeach HaChitzon, it's the outer Mizbeach. Mizbeach HaTamid, the Mizbeach where Tamid is brought. Mizbeach HaOla, there are many names to it actually. And it's Mizbeach HaChitzon, it's the outer Mizbeach, because this Mizbeach is outside the Heichel. There is another Mizbeach, a small one, inside this chamber, and that was only used for Ketores. So they would take fire and coals off the outside Mizbeach, take the coals and bring it into the Heichal. They would walk up the steps of the Ulam, into the Heichal, and burn the Ketores on the small Mizbeach in the Heichal. So that's the second fire. The third fire, you can see in your picture, it's called Ma'areches Eish HaTamid. The purpose of that fire is simply to have a fire. The Torah tells us in Parshas Tzav, Eish Tamid Tukat Ala Mizbeach Lo Sichbeh. There is to be a fire on this Mizbeach, and it is not to be extinguished. So to make sure that there was a constant fire on the Mizbeach There was a fire on the Mizbeach that simply was there to be Makayim. The mitzvah of a fire should always be on the Mizbeach. So those are the three areas of fire. The Marocha Gedola, the large fire for Karbonos. Then the Marocha of Ketores, to take fire to bring in, to burn the Ketores. And the Marocha Eish HaTomid, just to keep fire constantly on the Mizbeach. In the middle, you can see a large circle. That's the circle as Karbonos were being burned. And there was ash that accumulated. They would clean off the top of the Mizbeach. They would shovel all the ash into the middle of the Mizbeach. And that's where this ash would remain. And that middle pile of the ash is called the tapuach, because it looked like an apple. So the middle of the Mizbeach has ash that accumulated. And every day they would take a little of that ash off the Mizbeach, which is a whole separate discussion. And that's called the mitzvah of Trumas Hadeshen. Every morning, a little of that ash was removed from the Mizbeach. And we'll perhaps learn about that later in the Masechta. So that is the Mizbeach that we're building. The ramp begins in the south. The Mizbeach is more towards the north. The foundation is 32 by 32 going up 1. And then the Sovev is 30 by 30 going up 5. Then there's the roof, the Gag HaMizbeach, which goes up 3, and it's 28 by 28. And then there are the corners. Each of them take up an amma, leaving you 26 by 26. Another amma where the Kohanim can walk around these fires, an amma each side. So 26 by 26 became 24 by 24. Okay? And that's what the Mishnah just described to us. Now the Mishnah is going, the new part of the Mishnah that we're learning today is built upon what we just reviewed from yesterday. We're on page 44 of your Middos. Amar Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi gives us a historical note. Now this is a fascinating historical note. He's going to tell us what the Mizbeach looked like in the first Beis HaMikdash. Remember, Middos is a discussion of the second Beis HaMikdash. And through understanding how the second Beis HaMikdash was built, we understand a great deal about how the third Beis HaMikdash is to be built, which is what we do here every morning. We're trying to build the third Beis HaMikdash with God's assistance. So this is teaching us about the second, which is a historical Beis HaMikdash, from which we have a jump point to build the third Beis HaMikdash. But here we get a comment from Rabbi Yossi about what the Mizbeach looked like in the first Beis HaMikdash. And the Mizbeach in the first Beis HaMikdash was smaller than the Mizbeach in the second Beis HaMikdash, and we're going to learn why today. What's fascinating is, we have mentioned many times, that you cannot add to the dimensions of the Beis HaMikdash, you're not allowed to add really to the dimensions of any of the Kalim. So there's a question, the Ramban deals with this a bit in Pashas Truma. How were different vessels made different sizes in the Beis HaMikdash? The Beis HaMikdash, the first one that Shlomo built, the Mizbeach that Shlomo built was not the same size as the Mizbeach that Moshe made in the Mishkan. And in Pashas Truma, the Torah says, V'chein tasu. This is how you build the Mikdash, V'chein tasu, and so shall you do. And on V'chein tasu, Chazal tell us, and Rashi comments in Pashas Truma, V'chein tasu ledoros. These are dimensions forever, for all generations. Therefore, when the first Beis HaMikdash was built, certainly the second, the first Beis HaMikdash was built, whatever sizes were used by Moshe in the Mishkan should have theoretically been used by Shlomo in the Beis HaMikdash. And we find that's not exactly true. And specifically, when we talk about the Mizbeach, Shlomo HaMelech's Mizbeach in the first Beis HaMikdash is bigger than Moshe's in the Mishkan. And the Mizbeach in the second Beis HaMikdash is bigger than Shlomo's Beis HaMikdash. Now, how can that happen? That is a discussion that will begin in this Mishnah. Of course, it's a very complex discussion, but the Mishnah will begin this discussion, and Rabbi Yossi opens up the subject for us by telling us what the first Mizbeach looked like in Shlomo's Beis Hamikdash, comparing it to the bigger Mizbeach in the second Beis Hamikdash. The Mizbeach that we're building, as we learn, for the third Beis Hamikdash, will be a replica of the second Beis Hamikdash. So the third Beis Hamikdash, the Mizbeach is not going to look like Shlomo's Mizbeach. It's going to look like the Mizbeach that was built by those who came back from Bavel for the second Beis Hamikdash. Okay, we have to take this very slowly. We're now going to look at the Mizbeach in the first Beis Hamikdash. Reb Yossi. Mitchila, originally in the first Beis Hamikdash, lahoya el shmona ve'esrim al shmona ve'esrim. In the first Beis Hamikdash, the lower part of the Mizbeach, the Yesod, was not 32 by 32. That's what they did in the second Beis Hamikdash. In the first Beis Hamikdash, Shlomo built the Mizbeach, the bottom frame, the Yesod, was only 28 by 28. Kones va'ola b'midazu, ad shenimtza makom hamarocha esrim al esrim. And then they built the Mizbeach in the first Beis Hamikdash exactly as we just described in the second Beis Hamikdash. The only difference is the second Beis Hamikdash starts at the bottom at 32. In the first Beis Hamikdash, it started at 28. Now let's think just about our second Beis Hamikdash that we just learned about. It started at 32 at the bottom. How much room was there on top for the fire? We learned it was 24. Because between the base at the bottom, which was 32, and the place on top, which was 24 for the fire, we lost 8 amos. We lost an amma each way going up. Right. If we keep on looking at the picture, we go back to diagram 20. Every time we built another piece of the Mizbeach, we lost an amma. The bottom, 32, we went in an amma. And that's an amma on each side. We went up 5, went in an amma. Went up and lost an amma because of the corners. Lost an amma in order for the Kohanim to walk around. So by the time the 32 by 32 Mizbeach at the bottom came to the top where we can make a fire, we lost 8 by 8. So 32 by 32 at the bottom became 24 by 24 at the top. Now let's go to the first Beis Hamikdash. If in the first Beis Hamikdash they built the Mizbeach the same way, except they started the bottom at 28, do your math. Second Beis Hamikdash, the bottom starts at 32. At the top, the fire is 24 by 24. If that means there's a loss of 8. If I go to the first Beis Hamikdash and I build it the same way, except I start at the bottom 28 by 28, I'm going to lose 8 again at the top. So how much room will there be for fire at the top in the first Beis Hamikdash? 28 less 8, so it's 20. In the second Beis Hamikdash, the bottom was 32 by 32, and the place for fire on top was 24 by 24. In the first Beis Hamikdash, where they built it smaller, the bottom was 28 by 28, and they still lost the same 8, so it was 20 at the top. So let's read Reb Yossi again. I'm Reb Yossi. Reb Yossi says, excuse me, in the first Beis Hamikdash, lahoya el shmonev esrim al shmonev esrim. In the first Beis Hamikdash, the bottom was 28 by 28, and it went up 1, and it went in, it went up 5, and it went in. Same idea. Kones va'ola b'midazu, chenimtza makom hamarocha esrim al esrim. And therefore, the top, where you're going to have the fire, is only 20 by 20, which is what we just explained. The second Beis Hamikdash, 32 by 32 at the bottom, leaving 24 by 24 at the top for fire. Second Beis Hamikdash, you start at 28 by 28 at the bottom, you're going to have at the top 20 by 20. Okay. Now, he's going to explain to us, this is an amazing explanation. Again, there's this big question about how Shlomo makes a Mizbeach different than Moshe in the Mishkan, and how in the second Beis Hamikdash they make a Mizbeach different than the first Beis Hamikdash. We're going to touch. That's a big question, and I'd say the Ramban and Pashas Truma on the words V'chein Tasu discusses this. It's a Machlokes Rishonim. But we're going to have an amazing discussion now about why they changed it in the second Beis Hamikdash. In other words, they made the base 20. The first Beis Hamikdash was 28. The second Beis Hamikdash, they decided they were going to expand it to 32. So now the Mishnah tells us, page 44 in Middos, Rabbi Yossi continues the explanation. Ukshe'olu b'nei Hagola, the exiled Jews came back to Eretz Yisrael. The Bnei Bavel came back to Eretz Yisrael after the 70 years. We've already talked about who those people were. Most of the Jews did not come back as startling as that is. Ezra Nehemiah said it's time to come back, and we're going to build a Beis Hamikdash. Wow, come back and we're building a Beis Hamikdash. Most Jews remained behind in Bavel. But when these exiled Jews, 43,000 or so of them, came back to Eretz Yisrael, Hosifu olav arba amos min hadorom, va'arba amos min hamayrav. They added 4 amos to the south and 4 amos to the west, kimin gamma, like a Greek letter gimel. Now we have a new diagram here. It's diagram 28. They added 4 amos on the southern side of the Mizbeach, and they added 4 amos on the northern side of the Mizbeach. Now you can see in the picture, they're showing you the original. They're showing you the original 28 and an additional 4 on the southern side of the Mizbeach and an additional 4 on the northern side of the Mizbeach. So therefore, the Mizbeach that was originally 28 by 28, by adding 4 amos on the south and 4 amos on the west, they now had a base, instead of 28 by 28, they had a base of 32 by 32. Okay, that's your picture, 28. And again, they're showing you at the top, Mokum Marocha, the place for the fires, and they're showing you 24 by 24. This is the Mizbeach of the second Beis Hamikdash. And because they added 4 at the bottom, the whole Mizbeach became bigger. Therefore, at the top, it was 24 by 24. If they didn't add the 4 by 4 in the second Beis Hamikdash, then the bottom would have been 28 by 28. The top would have been 4 less, 20 by 20. But because they added 4 on the bottom to the 28, made it 32 by 32, they now had the top for fire as 24 by 24. Now, why did they do this? And it looked like, if you take a look at diagram 28, at the top of it, they're showing you what the Mishnah says it's like a Greek gimel. A Greek gimel is like our chaf sofit, but it's backwards. It's showing you, or an upside down L, whatever letter you want to imagine. But it's the western side and the southern side got additional 4, making it 32 by 32. Shenemar, why did they do this? Now this brings us to that amazing concept that we've talked about. Between the first Beis Hamikdash, after it was destroyed by the Babylonians, and the building of the second Beis Hamikdash through Ezra and Nehemiah, there were 70 years. During those 70 years, probably towards the end of those 70 years, Yecheskel Hanavi lived. Yecheskel basically lived in the same time as Yirmiyahu. The two of them lived over 100 years after Yeshayahu. So don't get Yeshayahu, we lump them, Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, Yecheskel. They don't live at the same time. Yeshayahu lived, as we learned on Tuesday morning, the Navi Yeshaya lived certainly more than 100 years before Yirmiyah and Yecheskel. Yirmiyah and Yecheskel lived during the Churban. Yecheskel had a prophecy. There are chapters in Yecheskel, chapter 43 and onwards, God took Yecheskel and took him on what we would call today a virtual tour of a Beis Hamikdash. They have these virtual tours that you can see. I sent out the link courtesy of Dr. and Mrs. Samet, who found the free link. There was someone that did a fantastic virtual tour of the Beis Hamikdash, and we sent out that link to the group. I don't know if you took advantage of it and took the virtual tour. It was really amazing. But yet, Ribono Shalom took Yecheskel on a virtual tour of the third Beis Hamikdash. Everybody hear me? The first Beis Hamikdash has been destroyed. The second hasn't even been built. And God is taking Yecheskel on a virtual tour of the third Beis Hamikdash, which means that there was knowledge that the second Beis Hamikdash was an interim structure between 1 and 3. And that's a whole separate discussion about the purpose of the second Beis Hamikdash. If it was apparently known, it wouldn't last permanently. But before the second is built, Yecheskel is being taught how to build the third one. And now we get the pasuk. Now we have to understand the people in the second Beis Hamikdash, they're building the second Beis Hamikdash, they come back from Bavel. They know Yecheskel. And Yecheskel may have taught them all about the third Beis Hamikdash, may have not, I don't know. But they were familiar with things that Yecheskel saw. And the only way they were familiar is he taught them. And Yecheskel prophesied that the third Beis Hamikdash, the Mizbeach, would be 32 by 32 at the bottom. And because the third Beis Hamikdash was going to be 32 by 32 at the bottom, the people in the second Beis Hamikdash decided, we're going to make the Mizbeach of the second Beis Hamikdash 32 by 32, like the third Beis Hamikdash. Why did they decide to copy the third? Why did they copy the first? And now we're going to have that discussion. But first, the Mishnah quotes a pasuk. How do you know that the third Beis Hamikdash is 32 by 32 at the base, the Yesod? Shenemar, the pasuk says in Yecheskel chapter 43, Ve'ha'ariel, the Ariel. The Ariel means the top of the Mizbeach, where the fires are. And the reason it's called Ariel is because it's made up of two words, Ari, lion, Kael, God. In the first Beis Hamikdash, fire would come down from heaven onto the Mizbeach, and this fire that went onto the Mizbeach took the form of almost a lion. So the fire looked like the form of a lion, the heavenly fire. So they called the top of the Mizbeach with this heavenly fire that looked like a lion, they called it Ariel, God's lion. So the pasuk in Yecheskel prophesying about the third Beis Hamikdash says, Ve'ha'ariel, the top of the Mizbeach that has the lion fire, Shteim Esrei Orech, the length is 12, B'Shteim Esrei Rochav Ravua, and 12 wide as a square. So the Mishnah now asks, Yachol she'ena el Shteim Esrei al Shteim Esrei. Right now, that's all the pasuk tells us, that's all Yecheskel tells us, is at the top, the God fire, the lion fire, the form of lion fire, is 12 by 12. The top of the Mizbeach is 12 by 12. Where do I get 24 by 24? So the Mishnah explains, Kshu Omer, when Yecheskel then continues and says, El Abbas Ruva'ov, the 12 by 12 are 4 squares, means that the top of the Mizbeach, which is a large square, you make 4 squares on top of the Mizbeach. And each square is going to be 12 by 12. So if you have 12 by 12, 12 by 12, 12 by 12, you have 24 by 24. See, I believe we have. Okay, I'll show you my picture. Okay, you take the Mizbeach, The top of it, the Pasuk says, is 12 by 12, but then it says 12 by 12 in 4 squares. So each square is 12 by 12. 12 by 12 plus 12 by 12 plus 12 by 12 plus 12 by 12. Yecheskel has just taught us that the Mizbeach in the third Beis HaMikdash, the top where the fire is, the Ariel, is 24 by 24. And therefore, in the second Beis HaMikdash, they adopted Yecheskel's vision of the third Beis HaMikdash, and they built a Mizbeach that would be 24 by 24 at the top. If it's going to be 24 by 24, we've been building the Mizbeach from the bottom up. 32 by 32, 30 by 30, 28 by 28, 26 by 26, 24 by 24. They were building it from the top down. Yecheskel's vision says that there will be 12 by 12, 12 by 12, 12 by 12, 12 by 12. So they now know the top of the Mizbeach is 24 by 24. If the top of the Mizbeach is 24 by 24, and the bottom has to be 8 amos bigger because of all the indents that we discussed, so you now know if 24 by 24 is the top, then 32 by 32 is the bottom. Malamed shemin ha'emtza humodeh. From here we learn that you measure the Mizbeach from the middle. It's 12 by 12 from every center point. 12 by 12 to the east, 12 by 12 to the west, 12 by 12 to the north, 12 by 12 to the south gives you 24 by 24. The chut shel sikra. Let's see if we're going to go into the chut shel sikra. We're going to stop here before we finish the Mishnah, and we're going to discuss for a few minutes why they made the Mizbeach 32 by 32 in the second Beis HaMikdash, and why it will be 32 by 32 in our third Beis HaMikdash, rather than the 28 by 28 of Shlomo HaMelech. Okay. We know that on the Mizbeach, at the top of the Mizbeach, when they brought certain karbonos, they would pour wine, Nisr Hayayin. We also know that on Sukkot, they, in addition to the wine, they would pour water. Nisr Hamayim, Ush'aftim Mayim B'sasayin. Right, that's a Simcha Space Hasho'eva, the Simcha of the gathering of the water. We learned about that earlier. They brought the water through one of the entry points in the Azorah called the Shar Hamayim. The Levium would be standing on the 15 steps before, in front of Shar Nikanor, and they would be playing their music and singing the 15 Shar Hamalos. The dancing would occur in the Ezras Nashim. The women would watch from the balcony, and water would be brought through the Shar Hamayim. Okay, if we go back to picture diagram 3, you have the Shar Hamayim. So the Levium are on these 15 steps in front of Shar Nikanor. They're singing the 15 Shir Hamalos. The women are on balconies. The men are dancing in Ezras Nashim. The southern wall of the Azorah, people walked out and went to the Gichon. They drew water, and they brought the water back through the Shar Hamayim. There was a whole process of blowing shofar. They brought the water into the Shar Hamayim. Everybody see where Shar Hamayim is? That's Shar Hamayim. And when you come into the Shar Hamayim, you're right near the Mizbeach. And then they would pour the water on the Mizbeach. So there are two kinds of, quote unquote, the fancy word that we see in the English Chumash, libations. There was the water libation, and there was the wine libation. The whole year it was wine. On Sukkot it was wine and water. Where did this wine and water go when they poured it on top of the Mizbeach? Where did it go? So in the first Beis HaMikdash, there was, we know there's something called the Shitin, and we talked about that. Whether they were there from creation or whether David, that's where the Shir Hamalos comes from. David dug to the center of the earth. He punctured the plug. The water came up, was going to flood the world. We learned about that in Gemara and Sukkah, and that's why David eventually at the end of the story said the 15 Shehamalos. This wine and this water was supposed to go down into the Shitin. When they built the first Beis Hamikdash and Shlomo built the Mizbeach, as we learned yesterday in the Rambam said, Mokam HaMizbeach Mechuvan. The Mokam of the Mizbeach is in the precise, exact place. That's the place where Adam built the Mizbeach, Cain and Hevel built the Mizbeach, Noach built the Mizbeach, Avram built the Mizbeach for the Akedah. That's the Mokam HaMizbeach. So it's Mechuvan B'Yosef. It's in that place where the Shitin were dug. Okay. The water that's poured on top of the Mizbeach and the wine that's poured on top of the Mizbeach is supposed to go into the Shitin and go all the way back down to the center of the earth. In the first Beis Hamikdash, they built the Mizbeach 28 by 28, and the wall, we'll get to which wall, not today, but one of the walls of the Mizbeach was right next to, they dug a bore, they dug an opening in the ground, and that opening led to the Shitin. So what would happen in the first Beis Hamikdash is they would pour the water and the wine in a corner of the Mizbeach, and eventually the water and the wine would seep off the wall of the Mizbeach, outside the Mizbeach, would seep down the wall of the Mizbeach, and would go into this bore, this ditch that they dug, and from that ditch it went down into the Shitin. So the Mizbeach did not cover the bore. There was a 28 by 28 foundation, and outside the foundation there was a ditch in which the water and the wine seeped off the top of the Mizbeach, down the wall of the Mizbeach, into the ditch and into the Shitin. In the second Beis Hamikdash, they didn't want to do it that way. And that's what we'll discuss tomorrow. In the second Beis Hamikdash, they wanted to do it differently. Now, wanting to do it differently really doesn't concern anybody. You can do whatever you want, but it has to be done al pi Hashem. You cannot change the structure of the Beis Hamikdash. You cannot change the structure of the Mizbeach. Remember, we learned that even when they wanted to put brackets into the Ezras Nashim, so they can put planks on it, so that the women can stand there on a balcony in order to watch the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, the Gemara in Sukkah, we read the Gemara had a problem. Who gave them permission to put brackets and planks? You can't add a structure to the Beis HaMikdash. It was all God-given instructions to God Hanavi and Nasan HaChozeh to David HaMelech, who passed to Shlomo. How do you put up brackets and planks and make a new structure? And the Gemara, if you remember, learned this out from the Levaya of Mashiach ben Yosef. When we talked about Mashiach ben Yosef, Mi'etz Hashem, we shouldn't have to have a Levaya for Mashiach ben Yosef. We should be mispal of him every day, as we mentioned, that he should survive and chas shalom not die. So there's always a problem when you're going to change something in the Beis Hamikdash. And here we're not just changing, we're not putting up brackets and some planks. We're actually changing the whole keli. We're changing it from 28 to 32. So what gave them permission to do that, we'll deal with B'li Neder tomorrow. But what they wanted to accomplish, of course, in order to accomplish, you have to have some way to say, yes, you're permitted to do that. The reason they were permitted to do that is B'li Neder tomorrow. Why they did it is for the following reason. They didn't want the wine seeping off the Mizbeach, coming down, the wine and the water on Sukkot. They didn't want the wine seeping off the top of the Mizbeach, down the wall of the Mizbeach, into the bore, and then into the ditch. They wanted the Mizbeach to cover up this ditch. And then they would create a system where the water and the wine would be poured on the Mizbeach. There would be a hole at the top of the Mizbeach, and the wine and the water would go into this hole, go straight through the Mizbeach. This would be a pipe in the Mizbeach, from the top of the Mizbeach through the bottom of the Mizbeach. And the wine and the water, instead of going over the wall of the Mizbeach, would go into this pipe, and the pipe would go into this ditch, and the ditch went into the Tahom. So they built the Mizbeach bigger in a square. They needed to keep it square, but they wanted the Mizbeach to be big enough. They couldn't move it around, right? Mizbeach is mechuv biyoser. The basic 28 by 28 has to be in a specific place, to the point where we learned yesterday that 3 Nevi'im, Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi, came to Eretz Yisrael with the exiles who came back, and they taught them different things about the Mizbeach, where the Mizbeach should be, the dimensions of the Mizbeach, etc. So the 28 by 28, they couldn't just say, let's keep it 28 by 28, and we'll move it over a little, so the 28 by 28 will cover the ditch. You can't do that. The 28 by 28 has to be an exact place. And that 28 by 28 did not cover that ditch that went into the sheeting. So they had to keep the 28 by 28 in its place. And what they did is they added 4 to cover up the ditch. And then to keep it a square, they added another 4. So they added 4 to the west and 4 to the south. And now the ditch is covered. The Mizbeach is in its right place. It's been expanded. The ditch is covered. Wine and water get poured on top of the Mizbeach. They go into this pipe that's on the top of the Mizbeach that goes through the Mizbeach into the ditch, which is now covered by the Mizbeach, into the sheeting. This is going to bring us back to diagram 19, which we'll talk about again more tomorrow. We mentioned this the first time yesterday when we looked at this picture. You see this pipe? There's a pipe coming up. You can see it in 1A, 2A, and 3A. No matter how high the Mizbeach is going, there's a pipe in there. This is the pipe that they created through the whole Mizbeach. It went from 1A, which is the bottom, through 3A, all the way to the top. It came out. Now you can't see the pipe because the whole Mizbeach, you can only see it because they're doing it in the picture step by step. But once the whole Mizbeach is built, the only thing you can see at the top is the top opening of the pipe. You don't see the pipe. The pipe is inside the structure of the Mizbeach. And the way they did that was when they put the rocks in each level and poured the molten, they poured the hot lead and poured the tar to harden the stones. They put a pipe or sticks, whichever you want. They put it in there so that no rocks would go there, no tar would go there, and that remained a circular open space. And then when everything hardened, they pulled out these sticks, and then they had a nice circle in there. Okay, so by putting something in this area from the first level, in that little circular area, no stones fell. In that circular area, no tar dried. And when the Mizbeach was finished, they pulled out whatever they put in there. And now they had a circle open from the top of the Mizbeach, going through the bottom of the Mizbeach, into the ditch, the bar, and into the sheeting. And that's why they went from 28 by 28. They couldn't move the 28 a little over to cover the ditch. Not allowed to do that. It has to be in a specific place. But to cover the ditch, they added 4 by 4, 32 by 32 now. And now at the top of the Mizbeach, there's an opening with a pipe going through the Mizbeach, going into the ditch, and going into the sheeting. So that's how that worked. So that's why they went from 28 by 28 to 32 by 32. How the water and the wine actually got into that hole at the top of the Mizbeach, we'll talk about tomorrow. That's something called the Sapalim. And what gave them permission? It's a very nice idea. Instead of the wine and the water going over the side of the Mizbeach and leaking out into the ditch and then into the sheetin, they expanded the Mizbeach so it covered up the ditch. That's a very nice decorative idea. But what gives you the right to make the Mizbeach 28 to 32? And that we will take a look at Bli Neder tomorrow. And Bli Neder finish this Mishnah as well. And again, we will come back to this trick. We'll call it a trick for now. But you can see in 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, you can see that the foundation of 32 by 32 does not go on all four sides. There is a thick foundation on side one, a thick foundation on side two. There's no thick foundation on two sides. And we're going to see how they accomplished that, and we're going to see why they did that.